Today's video, we're going to be talking about the most hated 911 ever. Or is it? Pretty interesting story. Oh, by the way, trivia. Porsche started as a company in what decade? You may be surprised by the answer.
When this car came out, it was such a radical departure for Porsche, so radical. Many would think that is the most beautiful Porsche 911 of all time. This became the first of the water-cooled motors versus air-cooled motors. So now you have two fronts that look very similar. The most hated, I think, has more to do with its cosmetics than it does its performance.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We are at a very, very special place, and we're going to pan back in just a few minutes so you can see all these amazing cars. I can hardly control myself, pulled in the gate here earlier today, but we have Dave Van Epps from Zonderworks, and he is a Porsche restoration specialist. So today, we want to talk about the Porsche 911 that everyone loves to hate. Dave, can you tell us why this particular car is the most hated 911?
Well, you know, I'm sure there's others that you could argue, but in any given generation, there's always a particular car or two that that just don't seem to meet the fancy of the public. And the 996 generation of the Porsche 911, which was 1999 through 2004, is probably the one that is the best value Porsche for someone that's trying to get into the Porsche game in a 911. Its real reason for being what we'll call the most hated, I think, has more to do with its cosmetics than it does its performance, because it's really quite a lovely car to drive, great value in a 911. But the famous fried egg headlight here that we see, or why they call it a fried egg. Now this particular year does not have the amber lens here, but I think it's one of the reasons it became called the fried egg was the amber yolk that was here on some of these cars, and then a bit of a runny egg as it was running off the front of the nose of the car. This was a tough time for Porsche. So Porsche was developing the Boxster at the same time. The front ends of these cars are very similar. I think it's another one of those reasons that this car doesn't have its own unique identity. And if, I don't know if you can pan over and look at the Boxster that we have sitting next to this car, but you can see that the headlight assembly is the same. This happens to be a 2000 Boxster. I'm assuming this is a 2000.
It's 01.
It's an 01, okay. But this is Porsche's entry-level car.
Right.
This was Porsche's premier driving machine. So now you have two fronts that look very similar. The design styling certainly, those cues are almost identical between the two front of the cars, and so that's certainly one of the reasons. Probably the most prevalent reason is the appearance of the car. Coming from the prior generation, the 993, which was until 1998, that car is so iconic. It's the last of the air-cooled cars. And so here was a major departure for Porsche as this became the first of the water-cooled motors versus air-cooled motors. And the car was just a big departure in terms of its styling. It didn't have the same presence as the 993. It didn't have the same masculine haunches that the 993 had, especially at the rear end of the car on the 993. The 996 is a little bit more aero, is a little bit more smooth and rounded in many places. And the lower section of the car, now this particular car has partial aero kit on it, And that's a nice option that helped change the appearance of these cars.
Now you say partial, what else would have been included?
It would have had a tail.
Okay.
There's a different spoiler on the front of the car.
Okay.
The side skirt, and then it would have had what they call the taco spoiler, which is a specific rear tail that it had that has a kind of a U shape, and they call it the taco. But the aero kit is a nice desirable option on a 996 to give it a little bit more presence on the car and kind of square it off a little bit, give it a beefier look.
Sure.
So that's the main reason, though, that the car is unloved. There's other mechanical reasons, of course, as well, which we could move into too.
Well, before we go too far,
yeah,
I can tell you from experience, this car is an absolute dream to drive. And if we would rewind the clock to early 2000s, and I'd paid a significant amount of money for this dream car and seen the lower price, lower base level car,
right,
I can see where I might get a little upset about how come they look the same.
Sure. I think the thing that the Porsche purist really didn't like about either of these cars, because the fried egg went away very quickly. It went away as quickly as they could make it go away, right? Within a few years, this was gone. The 996.2 had a modification to that light to try to freshen it up a little bit and make it a little more angular, a little
less
macho,
drippy.
a little less drippy, right? The 996 had a specific presence to it in terms of the evolution of this car from the prior generation, from the air-cooled cars of the late 90s. The 98 993 had a very different styling approach. Many would think that is the most beautiful Porsche 911 of all time.
It's beautiful.
The 993 air-cooled car. But it had a very strong presence, some haunches at the back, a wide rear end of the car. When the 996 came along, it was a very radical departure from an aero perspective, from a balance perspective, from a driving performance perspective, a stability perspective. Technologically, this car is far superior in many ways. It's just the things like fit and finish, quality of materials, the interior, which I know we'll talk about in a minute, were much different between the air-cooled 993 and the water-cooled 996. You know, when we talk about the evolution of this car to the next generation, I think if you look at the 997 variant, which came after this car in 2005, you'll find that this headlight quickly went away, and the more traditional oval headlight that took its place was far less a departure from the generations of 911s that we'd all come to love. All right, we're going to look at the interior now on this 996. I think it's another one of those areas on Porsches of this era that lets the car down a little bit. And I want to keep saying as we talk about this, these are still amazingly fun cars to drive.
Oh, absolutely.
They're great on the road, great road manners. There was a lot of compromises as it related to the materials that were used on the interior. Many more plastics that weren't the same caliber or quality of the plastics that were used. The dashboard, almost all plastic certainly during the early years. And if we were to, I think you'll probably cut away and show some other shots, but if we were to take a picture of this 996 and then shoot the same interior on the Boxster that we have sitting next to us, you'll find that all the parts are almost identical. And in fact, they are. They're just taken from the same parts bins. Things like the air vents and the dash binnacle and the knobs and the center console in particular, which some of them were painted like this one, and some of them were treated with sort of a rubberized plasticky paint that gave it a soft touch feel. But as time went by with your body oils touching it, it would break it down and it'd start to peel it off everywhere, and it just looks hideous.
That's been a big problem.
It's been a horrible problem with these cars. On this particular car, someone in its prior life has at least changed out the inserts on these seats, and these aren't stock. This diamond pattern wouldn't be something that Porsche would have used. This car would have been equipped with supple leather, and they call it supple leather because of this sort of puckered. So you could get this. This was an option where you called it out. You wanted to order it with supple leather, and they would do this kind of gathering process in terms of how it's made. Not my favorite, candidly, but this was kind of a carryover from the 993 as well, where they did this. The seats themselves, the frames are still made by Recaro. It's the same seat between this car and the Boxster, and I think Porsche shares a lot of seats between their models. Caymans, Boxsters, 911s, similar seats. They'll tend to do different insert stitching and so on like that to differentiate between the different models, but the seat frames and so on are very similar.
Is this a car that's positioned for some uptick in value?
How long would you like to hold on to it?
Fair question.
Because there was a time, certainly in the evolution of the Porsche 911, in the 80s and early 90s, the air-cooled cars were not worth very much at all. You could buy a very nice air-cooled car for $10,000 to $15,000, an air-cooled 911. Now, the $10,000 variant was probably rode hard and put away wet, but these cars have gone from being $15,000 cars to not even being able to touch one for less than $35,000, $40,000, and that's a very rough car, with most of these air-cooled cars trading in the 50s and 60s. So I think it's going to take some time, and like all things in collector cars, as the generation that grew up with this car, the car guys that were maybe teenagers in 1999 when this car came out become 40-year-olds and think back to the car that they lusted after when they were in high school, this car will suddenly have a renaissance. Now, it's already starting to have a renaissance as a value Porsche, and that's because the price of a brand new comparable 911, base 911, a car with any level of equipment on it is going to be $150,000. And you can pick up one of these for, a nice one in the mid-20s. 97, 98 is when this car was really being developed, to 2025, the leaps in technology are profound. So every iteration of this car that you drive, every one is different. Between a 996 and a 997, between a 991 and now the 992. Now you have things like active rear steering, and these cars are all turbocharged now, right? So much lower displacement engines with dual turbos that are creating ridiculous amounts of horsepower. So they're very different cars, and they're larger cars. The new cars are much wider, much bigger haunches than this car does.
This is a really, really fun car to drive. And look at the price difference between, a new 911 to what you can get in one of these.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal.
You can have a heck of a lot of fun in this car. There's a lot of value in all these cars, just like there is in driving an air-cooled, from a 914 to a 356, or any of the cars, 944s, 928s. They're all the pinnacle of sports car for sure, and so anybody that wants to get involved with Porsche, a 996 is a great entry point.
For sure. All right, so we've walked around on the back end of this car. By the way, in my opinion, the sexiest part of this car.
Without a doubt.
But you did allude to earlier in our conversation some of the mechanical concerns, we'll call them, with this particular generation.
Well, there's a few. The most obvious on this particular M96 motor is the IMS bearing. And The intermediate shaft bearing was a design problem where it did not get enough oil fed to it. And it's been a real thorn in the side for a lot of 996 owners, not because it was every car is going to have the failure issue, but more 10% of the cars have the failure issue. And if you don't address it, when it fails on you,
it's catastrophic.
It takes the engine out.
Right.
I mean, at that point, you've got a $26,000 used 911 that needs a $20,000 motor. So at that point, it's kind of a dead in the water issue.
Right.
IMS is really one of the major concerns on these motors, probably the biggest concern. Every Porsche engine, though, it doesn't seem to matter which one it is, no matter what era, all have their particular quirks and their particular mechanical things. That's not different than any other car.
Right.
But on a 996, this particular motor, that's its real Achilles heel. To fix it is probably a $3,000 job, to change that IMS bearing to some of the newer bearings that are engineered to be more robust. There's many versions, lots of people make a version of this, other engineering companies and firms and so on that have redesigned that bearing to make it more robust and last longer. But it's in a section of the motor where if the bearing completely fails, it takes out the entire cam mechanisms and everything else that are there. Right. To time the car. So that's
a pretty invasive repair.
Well, if it goes, and there's really no way to see it ahead of time. It's not like you can really look or check anything. There's some people that look at oil and they'll send the oil out for analysis to see what level of particulates are in it and so on. But by the point you're able to hear anything or see anything, it's over.
Too late. Yeah.
It's too late. So if your car's gotten to 100,000 miles, do you still do it? How nice is the car? How much of a gamble do you want to roll with? So that's really kind of the issue with the 996 motor.
Yeah.
And early 997s as well.
Okay. Well, this particular one has had that done, and the rear main seal.
Okay. That kind of goes hand in hand. When you do one, you do the rear main seal at the same time because the transmission. A lot of people will also do the clutch at the same time, since if the car's got 70, 80,000 miles on it, it's literally the labor's all the same. You're just putting a new clutch plate in it versus the bearing itself, just the bearing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But once that bearing's been replaced, that should be it, right?
Should be fine.
Okay.
Should be fine for the rest of the life of the car, the practical life of the car.
Having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and their position was that this 911 isn't the most hated 911, but rather the 911 that saved Porsche. Would you agree with that statement? What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that the development that was happening during this time, the Boxster and this 911, were absolutely critical to advancing the company further, keeping them relevant until they could bring out these more mass market cars like the Cayenne and the Macan, because those are truly the cars that had much more universal appeal, and not sports cars. And that really catapulted Porsche and allowed them to do this development that's allowed for the 992 and so on. But the 993, the air-cooled cars had run their course. All that was left in the line was really the 993 by that time. The 928 had been discontinued in '95. This car had to come out really as well as the entry-level car, the Boxster, in order for them to stay relevant. So, yeah, there's a point to that I would agree with for sure.
Yeah.
I think it taught them valuable lessons that allowed them to kind of move on and carry on.
Yeah, cool. So, in summary, we can say that if you want an amazing car with great performance at a steal of a deal, this may be the car for you. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Just a wealth of information.
Thanks.
Phenomenal facility.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go walk around and get some pictures and stuff.
And more than welcome.
If you have a Porsche and need some work done, this is your guy.